The auto industry has evolved into a high-tech world with minorities penetrating every arena, from design to sales and dealership, ownership, and marketing. A century ago, segregation and institutionalized racism blocked minority inclusion on every level of American society. In the world of auto retailing, it was the sacrifices and struggles of some key players that opened doors. They are our men of steel. Hi, I'm Caroline Clark. Making Tracks 2 is the story of minority pioneers in automotive retailing, presented by NAMAD. 100 years ago, the automobile industry was just gearing up. With less than 1 million cars sold annually and over 250 car manufacturers trying to make it to the finish line, auto retailing was a whites-only business within a whites-only world. The vast majority of blacks and other minorities were struggling to stay alive and survive day to day. Our men of steel would become trailblazers in an industry that didn't want their participation and didn't believe they deserved a substantive place in American society. Against tremendous odds, these pioneers, Native Americans, Asians, Hispanics, and African Americans, would become heroes in the auto industry. Along the way, each minority group suffered tremendously, but the obstacles for African Americans have been persistently the most visible in America's history.
We were uniquely in slavery for 246 years and bound by the Constitution as quote-unquote 3/5 of a human being as a matter of law. After we won that battle, then the matter of Jim Crow, another 100 years of Jim Crow, where the states maintained the right to control education and labor and the rights of black people.
In the early 1900s, most blacks lived in southern states, segregated in extreme poverty, working dirty, back-breaking, dangerous jobs. The majority were working in agriculture. Racist violence was rampant. The result for minorities who dared to operate a successful business was often death. Under these cruel conditions, hundreds of thousands of African Americans fled the South in the early 1920s, seeking economic opportunities in the North.
The real first black pioneers were the black workers in the foundries, the black workers on the assembly lines, the black workers who joined UAW and got pensions and got strength and became a huge black middle class.
Out of this migration emerged our first black pioneer in automobile retailing, Homer B. Roberts. In 1923, Roberts built a dealership facility housing early auto makes like the Rickenbacker, Hupmobile, and Whippet. In 1929, he opened a second Hupmobile dealership and remained in the car business until 1941, surviving the Great Economic Depression of the 30s. In the midst of the Depression, two other men of steel miraculously emerged on the scene, Ed Gaines and Ed Davis. In 1936, Ed Gaines became a Ford dealer in Chicago, remaining in business through 1940. In 1939, Ed Davis made history when he was awarded a Studebaker franchise, which stayed in business through 1955. By then, auto manufacturers had narrowed from hundreds to just the big three: Ford, GM, and Chrysler Plymouth. Years later, in 1963, Ed Davis would make history again when he was awarded the Chrysler Plymouth dealership in Detroit, the first African American to receive a Big Three franchise, before Davis even had the right to vote in this country. It wasn't until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that all minorities were guaranteed the right to cast their ballots. The tides were turning for minorities in the 60s, but it didn't come without a long, hard-fought battle for the right to participate in American society, even for the right to go to war. Rufus Dukes was one of the pioneers of the 40s and 50s. Dukes took ownership of Thomas Beckley Dodge in 1950, but he fought every step of the way.
Dad was a mechanic at a white-owned dealership, so he approached the owner of that dealership about selling, and after much convincing, they finally agreed to it, but they told him that if he did, he would have to sell cars from the service entrance.
When I first started, it did offend me that I couldn't sell cars on the showroom floor. It did offend me at first because I was determined.
Al Johnson started as a salesman in the 50s and became the first African American to own a GM dealership in 1967.
I spent something like 13 years begging for an opportunity to buy a dealership. And the only reason that I think it ended up getting it by 67 was the Reverend Martin Luther King. He talked to the president, and they had a meeting, and his whole theme was, why limit these people to being consumers only? Why can't they own a dealership?
Corporate America got a wake-up call, and minority dealers began to gain traction. This was the honeymoon period, when an explosion of minority dealerships arrived on the scene. One standout, Bob Neal, who became the first African-American mega dealer, selling and servicing Triumph, BMW in 1962, then adding Toyota, Pontiac, Jaguar, Honda, and Dodge franchises. But real business issues began to surface within a few years. Difficulty with capitalization, training, and deep-seated institutionalized racism.
That was that real tough struggle in the beginning because we were being put in dealerships that did not have a chance to succeed.
By the early 1970s, the majority of minority dealers were going bankrupt. One exception was Al Johnson.
I said, I think it's about time that you guys recognize that we need an academy.
Chrysler was the first to launch a training program for blacks. Under pressure, Ford and General Motors followed, creating critical inroads. But with the recession in 1979 came another wave of problems.
Interest rates went up to about 18%, and gasoline prices went up.
Automobile industry is in awful shape. Chrysler is going to go under. We lost half of the black dealers that were in business in that 1 year.
Therefore, we formed NAMAD out of necessity. We were viewed initially as some type of rebel organization. I don't know why, because our whole concept was about betterment of ourselves in the automotive industry.
Because of the close association that the line groups, being Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, had with the manufacturer. That close relationship prevented the line group presidents from being proactive in trying to achieve certain results because of the backlash as related to them personally. So a buffer is what NAMAD became between the line groups and the manufacturer. NAMAD could say things to the manufacturer that the line group presidents were uncomfortable saying.
We convened a meeting of all minority dealers in Washington, D.C. in 1980 and clearly laid out a plan to organize African-American automobile dealers across manufacturers' lines into an organization that could articulate their needs and their plans.
NAMAD is the watchdog. It measures what we are. If there was no NAMAD, we'd just go mad. Because NAMAD is a National Association of Minority Automobiles. It takes a check on where are blacks, Latinos, Asians, women, and that's measurable.
For us to be successful, we have to embrace that in a diverse culture. So it does make in a business sense to embrace every different ethnicity in our mainstream.
The biggest success NAMAD has had has been having a cooperation among all minority bodies to come under one. I know there's been talk about different organizations and separation and so on and so forth, but we have found when everybody speaks under one voice that that is much beneficial.
In the summer of 1980, President Carter flew into Metropolitan Airport and in a speech announced the help that the federal government was going to give to the automobile industry.
That was a real critical part, because if it wasn't for that loan, I wouldn't have made it.
The National Association of Minority Automobile Dealers, or NAMAD, was officially formed in 1980. Through the efforts of Jesse Jackson and Operation Push, Chrysler, Ford, and GM, key politicians, and a host of others who put pressure on all the right places. There were glitches along the road, but minorities flourished in the automobile industry for the next 25 years, riding the wave of the biggest economic boom in America's history until 2008, when the world came crashing down for all of us.
I was chairman at a time that was very difficult in the auto industry. Had two of the three big three go bankrupt. After that, we had a Japanese tsunami that devastated the industry.
We saw banks going under. We saw a lot of the financial institutions and investment institutions going under, as well as with the bankruptcy in General Motors and Chrysler. We lost well over 40% of the minority dealer body, and once those stores are gone, we will never get them back.
Mr. Damon Lester.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. I want to thank you for inviting me here to speak to you on behalf of all the small new automobile dealers in the United States. My name is Damon Lester, and I'm the president of the National Association of Minority Automobile Dealers. NAMAD represents over 2,000 ethnic minority automobile dealers, which represent less than 5% of the overall automobile dealer network in the United States.
Letters were written and meetings were held with President Bush and President Obama, requesting that minority dealerships be declared an economic disaster under the Small Business Administration and receive subsidies or at least loans.
The challenge was that at that point in time, all of the cash was dry. There was no liquidity in the market. These individuals already had to liquidate their stores, employees were disbanded, and there was absolutely nothing that could be done.
The reason for the shrinkage of minority dealerships across the United States, quite frankly, was strictly access to capital, the difficult economy, the bankruptcies, the reduction of franchises, on and on and on.
I think it's going to take a while for us to gain back to plus 700 dealers. That's on the African American side. Currently, in 2013, we had a little over 1,100 minority dealers. That's African American, Asian, Latino, Native American, compared to 18,000 dealerships throughout the United States. So we've never pierced the 5% representation.
Today, some 300 million cars are on our highways, with 15 million cars sold every year from 18,000 auto dealers. We are moving in a high-tech world that has accelerated far beyond our dreams since 1980 when NAMAD was formed.
We had to go through growing pains of developing an internet department, a business development center, really getting our salespeople engaged of understanding that their customer may not be walking through the door, that it may be coming through an email, and really trying to adjust our internal processes to mirror what the customer was wanting and asking for.
The numbers of minority dealerships are slowly building, but it's tough in this new financial terrain.
I think reputation is everything in the world, and that's one reason I feel that I have to be a straightforward, honest individual in order for people to trust me.
Bill Perkins, CEO and president of Perkins Auto Group, had his own secret weapon that kept him from going under, his stellar service department.
It's very vital. It takes a lot of pressure off of the front end of the business. We don't have to sell as many cars as we would have to break even or to make money.
We still have many reasons to celebrate. The new men and women of steel are leading us into the next 100 years in auto retailing.
I tell young people all the time, for every Tom Moorhead that you see, there are a lot of headstones behind me.
Like Thomas Moorhead, owner of BMW Sterling and Mini Sterling of Virginia. One of our pioneers of the 21st century and the first African American to acquire a Rolls-Royce dealership.
When I look at the browning of America, by 2025, for the vast majority of the cars that are going to be sold to people of color, we shouldn't be just consumers of the product, we should also have an opportunity to sell that product.
We have to look to the present and the future for those people who are going to carry the banner, who's going to be creative enough. We need to see what comes after Jesse Jackson, what comes after Bill Shack, what comes after those people who were there in the beginning. If new buds do not develop, then you have no right to exist. You will die.
I believe the auto industry is headed for blue skies. Very positive moving forward, and I will support NAMAD forever.
The future's in our hand. If we are willing to do research, mass education, mass action, there'll be mass growth. We take our foot off the throttle, the car stops. We keep fighting and keep our goals clear.